Well, it's great to be back in Charlotte. I grew up here, and it's always a good thing to be back. And so I'm really excited to be here. This is me, right there in the middle when I was 8. I've been making art for a really long time. I'm going to share one body of work with you today, and I was just laughing at the beginning of this afternoon because I saw Buck this morning on that video that we opened up with, and I was Buck on that trip. That was me as Buck. But anyways, there I am looking back, making photographs when I was about 8. And my mom's also in this photograph, and she did an extraordinary thing. When I was 10 years old, she packed my 3 older sisters and I into a red Volkswagen van and took us camping for 3 months in Europe. It was 1969, and she went to all the regular places. We went to Italy and France and London, and then she found out that we could also go into Prague and Czechoslovakia and Romania and Bulgaria, and we crossed 23 borders seamlessly, no problem. But on one of those borders, as we were going into Romania, we were stopped and held. And we were taken out of our van. Think about it, it's 4 kids, all females, and my mom. It was dark, it was a small checkpoint. We were held at gunpoint. They took everything out of our car, went through all of our stuff. So that moment for me was just extraordinary. There we were, no cell phones, no phones, trapped between these 2 countries and not really, not belonging to either side of this border. Have you ever thought about the border? Here's what our border wall looks like. So what I've been doing since 2007 is walking along the border. I canoe, I bike, I walk, and I pick up the things that people leave behind. Oops. I'm often asked, are you safe? I don't know. I always take someone with me. I often encounter the Border Patrol. They come in all shapes and sizes. Last time I was there, I was chased by helicopters, both Mexican and American. I've talked to Border Patrol people on horses, on all-terrain vehicles. It's an incredible experience. And I do know that I can do this work because I'm white and I'm privileged. And the first thing I do when I'm stopped is pull out my UNC ID and say, faculty, college, university. Then I pick up my big camera and I say, you don't want any bad press, do you? You don't want any bad press. So, this is where I've been working. If you see down there on the far right, there's Brownsville, Texas, and Matamoros, Mexico. And this is our border. It's a 2,000-mile long border. And this is what the river looks like. It's the Rio Grande. My guess is that everybody in this room could swim across the Rio Grande. Oops. And this is what it looks like if you come into the United States. So it looks like this hole in a riverbank, right? But think about it. Think if you're coming into the United States and you have your 3-year-old son hanging onto an inner tube, and you have your dry clothes on your back, and there might be a snake in the river, and it's night, and you're trying to find a way to scramble up this bank and come into the United States. This is your manifest destiny. So Brownsville is really close to Matamoros, so what happens is people come across the Rio Grande, they take off their wet clothes, change into dry clothes, and then move on into the United States. So I'm just photographing what gets left behind, sort of the remains. Here's an argyle sock. And I look at this argyle sock, and I not only think about the person who left it there, but I think about it as a reliquary of this great northern migration that's happening in the United States, something that we may or may not want to think about or look at. I started doing this work, one day I heard on NPR this statistic, and it was that 20% more women and children die crossing the US border. It's the most crossed border in the world. And I kept thinking, well, why is that? And what I realized is lots of reasons. But women get dehydrated. They often have kids, and the coyotes will leave them behind in a heartbeat if the child starts crying. So they just get left behind. Here's an inner tube I found. You know, I look at that inner tube and I think, oh yeah, Saturday afternoon at Lake Norman. Fun. If you're coming north, you think, okay, this is a way for me to send some money back home. It's a way for me to have some health care, maybe a better income. Think about it. If you live in Mexico, your average income is $3,000 a year. In the United States, the average income is $33,000 a year. So that's a big, big difference. You're working on fulfilling some hopes and dreams, but you're also coming up on our side of the border into a very, very uncertain future. And if you're a member of the Border Patrol, you might look at that inner tube and say, tool of a terrorist. Does this eyeshadow become just eyeshadow, or when I find it on the ground, is it a mask? You know, I often invite people to come with me, and they'll say, because I never walk the border by myself, but, and my Latino friends are like, are you kidding, Susan? We're not going there with you. You're stuck. You're going by yourself. But I usually find somebody to go with me, and they're always changed after they walk the border with me, because they always say, you know, I've lived here for years. I've never been to the border. I always thought it was just trashy, and I wondered why it was trash. And now I'll never see these objects the same way. This becomes, in the eyes of the Border Patrol, a weapon. So I find a lot of really personal items, brushes and combs and pens. Anything that's hard and short, if you're picked up by the Border Patrol, is a sign, you know, can be used as a weapon against them. So they just make you drop it, and it just stays there on the bank. And I'm always struck by these items. I'm looking at that hairbrush thinking, you know, that could be mine, it could be my sister's, it could be my mother's, and I could probably get your DNA from that toothbrush or from that hairbrush. I found this on a recent trip, and it's a little card. It's a saint card, and somebody left it just right on our side of the river, and it was a thank you for safe passage. This is one of the most powerful objects I found. This is the wallet of Alex Ramirez Cuba. Alex was 18 when he came north. I found his wallet. It was wet. It has his passport. It has his driver's license, his ID. There's a photo of him there. So what I believe is he ditched that right on our side of the border, because as he was coming up out of the bank, if he saw the Border Patrol, if they catch him with his Honduran passport, they would send him all the way back to Honduras. So can you imagine being 18 and crossing the southern border of Mexico, getting picked up on our side and being sent all the way back down there? So if he just got caught without that ID, his hope would be to just be sent back across the border into Matamoros. This, I was told the last time I gave a talk, was, I knew it was a flotation device. I knew it was a homemade flotation device, but someone came up to me in the audience and said, you know, Susan, this is what we use to float our kids across the river on. And this is another inner tube. Lots and lots of inner tubes are scattered along our southern border. And if you look closely, there's a big slit in this inner tube, and that is a sign that the Border Patrol found it, and they put a slit in it, and so it can't be used again. So sort of every time I go to the border, I see a new layer of things, and new things become evident, and it's also changing over time. The second part of this project I've been working on is creating an anti-archive. I've been thinking a lot about archives and which immigrants have archives. We have the Ellis Island sort of museum and archive. But where's the archive for the people who are coming north now? You know, what we usually save are those things from people who are rich and famous. You know, we have George Washington's wooden false teeth. Well, why do we have those? Because he was rich and famous, and you know, we think he's an important dude. So I'm saving these objects that represent for me this really powerful pilgrimage. They become relics for me. My mom, when I was a kid, took me to see St. Francis's robes in Assisi, and I'll never forget the power of that thread that I looked at. And I see these as really important symbols, and they're not from the rich and famous. This is Alex's wallet. This is ID. And there were two little strips of paper in his wallet, and they had numbers on them, and names, Blanca. And those were the numbers that he memorized on the journey as he was coming north. He knows those numbers, and those were the safe numbers that he was supposed to call when he crossed the border. Here's a toothbrush. I'm always so struck when I see these toothbrushes. And I think, well, what would you take with you when you cross the border? And I think, well, which toothbrushes do I see in my life? I see my husband's toothbrush. I see my toothbrush. When my son comes home from college, I see his. I don't see anybody else's toothbrush. And I've never, ever seen a toothbrush on the ground. Never, ever. Think about it. I lived in Baltimore for a while and learned to navigate neighborhoods by what I saw on the ground. Just drug paraphernalia or condoms or whatever, but I could always tell whether I was safe or not by that. And I never, ever once in Baltimore saw a toothbrush on the ground. I spoke with an immigration lawyer one time when I was down in Brownsville, and he said 50% of his cases are involving sexual violence against women. He said that's on the record. He said off the record, I think 99% of the women that come north are victims of some sort of sexual or physical violence. This is a shirt, and every time I look at this shirt, I think about, you know, who folded this shirt. I keep it folded in the archive because I think it's important. I think it tells the story of somebody. You know, we think about people coming north, and we think about who they left behind, what they left behind, what they were risking to come north. Maybe they were just trying to come north to be safe. And again, every time I go, something new sort of becomes visible to me. And this is a nest. So I started photographing these places that are sort of invisible. They're not objects anymore. They're just these nests. They're places where bodies have slept the night, where people were waiting for somebody to pick them up, where their coyote dropped them off and another coyote would pick them up and take them to their next stop, to Houston to work in a chicken plant, or maybe to North Carolina. I started working with the community when I was down there, and I did a temporary installation, and it's called Crossing Over a Floating Bridge. And I worked with a group of artists from Matamoros, Mexico, and Brownsville, Texas. And we built a temporary bridge out of children's inner tubes. It was a kind of a floating bridge that connected the two communities together. And we put it up. It was sort of a guerrilla affair. We didn't ask permission. And my original plan was to swim all the way across the river and bring it into the United States to tie these two symbolic countries together. And the Border Patrol were there, and they said, oh, no, you can't do that. We'll arrest you. And I'm like there with my little passport in a baggie, with a Ziploc bag, so it'll be dry. And they said, oh, no, we're going to arrest you. But you can come swim to the middle of the Rio Grande. So anyways, I swam it to the middle of the Rio Grande. My other friend swam out to meet me, and we tied the symbolic bridge together. And it was there, and it was beautiful, and it was temporary, but it was a real symbol of what I learned was the space that I'd been inhabiting. It used to be a place where people played and had their birthday parties, and now it's sort of this no man's land. It's a really beautiful territory on the river, and it's just become uninhabitable, and the wall's being built. But the other thing I did was I had a welcome table, which you saw briefly, and I made swimming trophies because I decided that every person who comes to the United States should be welcomed here and get a trophy. So we made a table, and we gave out trophies, and they said, you know, welcome to the United States in English and Spanish, and they were canoeing trophies and running trophies and swimming trophies. And when I first went down to the border, I said, this is the finish line. And then after I spent some time at the border, what I realized was, this isn't the finish line. This is just the beginning of a very uncertain future. The other thing that you saw briefly was a 10-foot wreath that I made called Something of Value. And it's really all about loss, and it's about the loss that takes place because there's no exchange of culture between these two countries that are so close to each other. There's the loss of, you know, culture. There's the loss of human lives. There's a great deal of loss on the US-Mexico border. And because people kept coming with me to the border and walking with me on the border, I started a new project last time, and I did it varying places along the border. And that was to encircle these objects that are left on the border with a blue line. And I did that because so many people came with me and they'd say, oh, I'll never look at this stuff again. You know, I just thought it was really trashy. But I also started encircling these objects with a blue chalk line because I lived in the Negev desert for a while. And at one point I was taken into the home of a family. And they took me into this room to see their child. And there was this lovely child in this metal crib and rocker of sorts. And there was nothing else in the room except for this blue line. And there was this blue line, and it was all the way around the room. And it looked like somebody had just taken a piece of chalk and walked around the room like this, as if in a ritual. And I asked the parents, I said, what's that for? And they said that it's there to protect the child. It's there to keep the evil spirits out. So this is my way of leaving sort of a protective circle around the objects that are left on the border, and also to make it visible to the people who come to the border after me. Somebody might drive by, somebody might be brave enough to go down there, and they're going to look at those objects, I believe, in a different way. I did this all along the border in Laredo. So here's what the border looks like without those blue lines. And then, can you see the blue lines? Yeah. And there's what it looks like transformed with the blue lines. So I hope you get a chance at some point to see the images that we missed. But I just want to leave you with one last thought, and that is, if you meet somebody who may or may not have come north from Latin America, from Guatemala, from Honduras, I just hope you'll think about what risks they took to fulfill their dreams.